Forbes India Leadership Awards.
Well, we'll move on to the debate, a power-packed topic, as Sumaira just mentioned. We'll be debating tonight if the government's Capex boost is going to kickstart private investment and economic growth. Let me welcome our debaters on stage. Saurabh Mukherjea of Marcellus Investment. Please come to my right. Madan Sabnavis is speaking against the motion, Chief Economist, Bank of Baroda. He'll be joining us here. But before we begin the debate, you'll find your voting meters on your table. Please do vote. You know what the topic is. Press T if you think that the government's Capex boost is going to kickstart private investment and economic growth. Press F if you think otherwise. Your time to vote starts now. Right, time up. We'll wait a bit. The results will just come up on the screen. And here it is. So 67% of the audience agrees that the government's Capex boost will kickstart private investment and economic growth, but 33% disagree. So that's quite a lopsided view the House has. Saurabh, you're speaking for the topic. You're in favor of the motion.
That's right.
So yeah, it seems that the House largely agrees with you, but we'll do the voting once again after the debate is over. I'll just go through the rules once again, the House rules for the debate. So essentially, you get 3 minutes to make your opening remarks. And Madan, you also get 3 minutes to open the debate. Following this, you'll get another 3 minutes to make your closing comments, and so will you. And then we'll come back to you for a final vote in regard to this debate. So, Saurabh, are you ready?
Yep.
Your time starts now.
Thank you very much, and it's a privilege to be debating with someone as distinguished as Madan. I've read his work over the years. I think he's a fabulous economist. So I'll keep it short and simple. I work in the stock markets. I'll have a few numbers that I'll throw at you. So if you look at India's Capex, or capital expenditure, as the economists call it, this used to be pretty low till the early 90s. It was as low as 20% of GDP. Middle of the 90s, Capex in India started going up. And if you look at the peak of Capex in India, just before the global financial crisis, we hit 35% of GDP as Capex. That was as good as it got. Now, interestingly, even though after the global financial crisis, Capex stayed down, it's actually been in the range of 30 to 35% for the last 10 years, right? What's very interesting is even though Capex in India has been 30 to 35%, there's this persistent feeling that enough Capex nahi ho raha hai, and this constant undercurrent and unease that something's wrong. So let's dig into the numbers to understand what's happened. The biggest driver of Capex in India, 60% of Capex, as per the government's data, is trade, hotels, transport and communication, right? Trade, hotels, transport and communication, massive sectors. This is 60% of India's Capex. Now, the story here is, before COVID, it was all right. These sectors accounted for, the Capex in these sectors accounted for around 20% of GDP. It was all right, but COVID understandably absolutely smashed Capex in these sectors. At the height of COVID, that 20% became almost 10% of GDP. Capex halved in these big sectors. You'll be pleased to know it's back to 17% of GDP. Pretty much all the lost ground during COVID has been made up. There's some way to go, but as the unlock continues, the main engine of India's Capex, which is trade, hotels, transport and communication, hopefully comes back. Our presence in the Taj this evening should hopefully help in that regard. Now let's come on to the Capex, which everybody thinks of conventional Capex, which is construction. This is where India's had a problem. Construction Capex as a percentage of GDP peaked. It peaked in 2011, and after that we had a 10-year downtrend, right? What's remarkable is that 10-year downtrend, ironically, has been reversed by COVID. So 10% was at its peak, construction Capex was 10% of GDP. It fell to as low as 5% of GDP. It halved during COVID. It's back up to 8%, right? And there's three drivers here which are firing great guns. bank lending, home loans, bank home loans are the cheapest they've ever been in the country. So the largest home loan providers in the country, HDFC, ICICI, are whacking out more home loans than they have ever done. I think HDFC made an announcement, I think 2 trillion is the last number they printed out for the 12-month of home loans. Secondly is stamp duty, property taxes have been reduced. And thirdly, the topic that you voted on, government capex at a record high. So if you add the two drivers of main capex, we are back to 31% of GDP.
Thanks, Saurabh. That was a fair enough argument. Sounded convincing. Madan, are you convinced?
Yeah, good
time
evening
starts
to
now.
everyone. Time starts now? Okay. India's GDP for the coming year is supposed to be 260 lakh crores. Okay, capital formation, what we call gross fixed capital formation, which is overall investment, will be around 28 to 30%, which is around 75, 78 lakh crores. Now, when we're talking of the government's capex plan of 7.5 lakh crores, if we just juxtapose 7.5 lakh crores with 78 lakh crores, it's around 10%. So ask yourself this question that can 10 lakh crores actually be driving the remaining 78 lakh crores? The answer is evidently not. We need to see more investment coming from other segments. And surprisingly, something which I think doesn't come to our notice is that the state governments tend to have a higher capex plan compared to the central government. So I think because there's a lot of media hype on the central government's budget, so I think all of us talk about 7.5 lakh crores. We don't have the data for 22-23, but if I go back to 21-22, when the center said they're going to spend 5.5 lakh crores, states were spending something like around 6 lakh crores. So if I just juxtapose the same number here and say, okay, 7.5 is going to become, say, maybe around 8 lakh crores. So the states actually drive investment almost, which is comparable levels to that of the center, if not slightly higher. The rest of it has to come from the private sector. Now, when we say the private sector, it's probably all of you all who are sitting here in this hall out here, as well as we as individuals, we are also contributing towards the overall capital formation. So today I think that when we're talking of the 7.5 lakh crores, which is primarily, I would say around 3.5 lakh crores is concentrated on roads, railways, and urban development. Another 1.5 lakh crores goes for defense. So that may not really be the kind of capital formation of roads and bridges which we're talking of. The central government has a very limited role to play when it comes to overall investment in the country. Now, another interesting thing about the government is that when the government keeps spending their expenditure, I mean, when the capex is being spent, it tends to get a bit volatile. When I say volatile, it's not to say that in April you say I'm going to spend 7.5 lakh crores. It doesn't work that way. What really happens is you do it in a phased manner. You see how your fiscal balances are running during the course of the year. And in case you feel that your fiscal deficit is going to slip, you slow down on capital expenditure because that is the discretionary expenditure. So this did not happen last year, 21-22, but right up to 19-20, we saw that the central government ended up spending less than what they budgeted because they were looking at the fiscal deficit number and saying, okay, we're above 3%, we're above 4%, we're above 5%. Let's cut back on what is discretionary, which is capital expenditure. So to my mind, when we are talking of central government expenditure, while it definitely does contribute to overall growth, it contributes to overall investment, it may not be the sole driving factor. We will have to look at the private sector to look for incentives, which I will come to in my concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Madan. That was very convincing. Saurabh, coming to you for the closing comments.
Sure. So I think agree with Madan that government capex is bound to be small, right? Government capex cannot be the whole and sole driver. But there are two other factors which are helping India massively. And as Madan himself said, we're already at a point where capital expenditure to GDP has exceeded 30%. Now there are two other hidden factors at work which are helping India immensely. The first is technology capex, right? So I think we just saw one of India's largest banks get an award a few minutes back. If you spoke to any of the banks in our country, and banking is a big sector of our banking as a percentage of GDP is a good 20%, or financial services is 20%. The biggest driver of capex in India increasingly is becoming technology capex. Now, how big is technology capex? This is a big question because the government statistician does not measure technology capex. If you build an app, you build a database, you provide technology training to your staff, that is not captured by the government statistician as technology capex. So we did a little bit of data crunching on this. If you take data from the private equity and venture capital community and add up how much money they're pumping into the country, and if you count that as a part of technology capex, if you look at the CMI's data on IT projects in the country, tech capex, were it included in the government stats, in the statistician stats, would already take India's total capex to 30 to 33%. Remember that we are already, 35 was the all-time high. If you include technology capex, we'd be pushing 30 to 33%, and we are not yet out of COVID properly. The second driver of capex, and in a way proof that this is happening, is job creation. So the EPO4 data, the Provident Fund data, and data from CMI shows in the last 3 years, India has created 32 million jobs in the formal sector. Just to be clear, 32 million jobs have been created in the last 3 sectors. These are years of COVID. The entire workforce of France is in 32 million. The entire workforce of the United Kingdom is in 32 million. So you have a situation where our country has created 32 million formal jobs, and that I think is proof that the capex engine, in spite of COVID, is up and running. I agree with Madan, the government can't do everything here, but the good news is the private sector and technology capex is firing, and job creation we are seeing in our country in the formal sector is proof of that.
Thank you, Saurabh. Madan, coming to you for the final argument.
Okay, so now when we're looking at how should we really be looking at government expenditure, government capital expenditure. So the problem really here is of demand. If you today look at Indian industry, see what is the capacity utilization rate? The only authentic data we have is from the Reserve Bank, which says as of September it was around 68%. Typically, you need to have 78 to 80% capacity utilization rate before a company goes in for fresh investment. So what we have seen in the last 10 years is that there's been very limited investment coming through. Our capacity utilization rate on an average basis has been in the region of around 73 to 74% at the best of times. We've never reached that 78 to 80 on a broad-based manner, which means that while some companies are definitely going in for investment, you look at the cement sector, steel sector, they will say we're operating at over 100% capacity utilization rates. So there is investment taking place. But for more broad-based investment to take place, we need to have better capacity utilization rates, for which we need to have greater demand. So it goes back to saying that, are we having enough consumption taking place in the economy? Consumption has slowed down even before the pandemic. And why is consumption slowed down? It's essentially because we have not created enough jobs. So we saw one thing, that our GDP has been growing. Maybe all of us in this room, we are becoming richer, we are spending more. But have I created jobs at a lower level so that people have more spending capacity? I think that's the main challenge for the country going ahead. So the way I look at the government is that 7.5 lakh crores is not important to me. The policies which came before and after, like if I look at the PLI scheme for us in industry, I think that's a great scheme. An enabling environment of the government is probably more important than the 7.5 lakh crores, though I agree that 7.5 lakh crores is what occupies maximum media time. All of us in our offices, the moment the budget comes out, we are trying to do number crunching, 5.5 went to 7.5, and we say, no, it was 6 lakhs, which went to 7.5 lakh crores, 25%, 40%. But at the end of the day, I think the effort which the government puts in is not what happens on 1st February, but it's throughout the year, what we saw right from the Atmanirbhar time. Mr. Piyush Goyal, credit to you and your government for the excellent job done. I think that is what is going to drive the economy and investment, not the 7.5 lakh. 7.5 lakh crores does help, but it cannot be the driver. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madan. Thank you, Saurabh. Both sides were very convincing. I can't make up my mind. So let's go to the audience for a quick audience poll. Have the post-debate poll results on the screen, please. Okay. So now it's
Saurabh, I think I won.
33% of the audience now feels that, yes, the government's capex will boost and kickstart private investment and economic growth, and 67% disagree. So that's been quite a reversal, and you've really convinced the audience, Madan. Thank you so much. Thank you, Saurabh Mukherjea. Thank you once again, both of you, for joining us. Thank you.
Forbes India Leadership Awards